Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're watching from. Welcome back to my channel. This is Happening Now Television. Okay, on the screen, this is David Ondeyi. Last 4 months, this man was telling us about Tinubu's drug case, and we didn't take it seriously. It looks irrelevant then, but based on the happenings now, it is now very relevant. So we're talking about it now, and this man revealed a lot of things about Tinubu's case, drug case. I want you to watch this video from the beginning to the end. Drop your opinion in the comment section box. Let's know your thoughts on this. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like and share this video so that many other people will watch and see this video. Thank you for being there. Credit to Arise News and Plus TV. This interview is coming from Arise News and Plus TV.
The recent circulation of a drug-related case linked to the presidential candidate of the All Progressives Congress, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has been a major talking point on social media. Minister of State Labor and Employment and Director of Public Affairs and spokespersons, Tinubu Shetima Presidential Campaign Council, Festus Keyamo, SAN, clarified that Tinubu was not a defendant in the drug trafficking case in the United States, and also said he will not respond to the invitation for a debate by investigative journalist David Ondeyi, as is unknown to him. Ondeyi, who had earlier written an article on Bola Tinubu in a post on his official Twitter handle, had asked Keyamo to appear in a debate on any television station of his choice to discuss the story about Tinubu's case. Joining us on this show this morning, as we discuss his open challenge to Festus Keyamo, amongst other issues, is David Ondeyi. Welcome to the morning show, David. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, David, let's go straight into the matter. You had invited Festus Keyamo to come and have a debate with you on this issue of the eligibility of the presidential candidate of the APC within the purview of Section 137 of the 1999 Constitution. And he says you are unknown to him. Okay? What really are the facts of this matter, and what is your interest in it?
Well, the facts of the matter are clearly contained in the documents, which I'm sure most Nigerians who follow the news cycle would have seen by now. And for any who haven't read those documents, what I would recommend is that you don't have to take my word or anybody else's word for it. Go read those documents. It might be a bit bulky, but sit down for 30 minutes and you get through it. What the facts established in those documents are unimpeachable, and it's written in very clear language in black and white that the address he opened one of the accounts in question was the same address that Moise Akonde, who was the drug kingpin, used as his drop-off point for heroin in Chicago. And perhaps most significantly of all, by his own admission in these documents, at the time all of this was going on, he was a treasurer at Mobile with a fixed monthly income of $2,400. And by his own admission, he had no other source of income. So somebody with $2,400 of monthly income, which comes to about $28,800 annually, had about $1.4 million in the bank, which on its own is bad enough. Now, it's also clearly outlined in those documents exactly where those funds came from, because he himself admitted to the IRS investigating agent, Kevin Moss, that on several occasions he had paid money belonging to Abiodun Agbele and Moise Akonde into his accounts before he then did an about face and claimed that he didn't know them. All these things are in the documents. What isn't included in the document, but which I was able to dig up on my own, was that just less than 10 days after having a conversation with Special Agent Moss in 1992, when this case was being investigated, he started spending significant sums of money to purchase real estate in the US. Bear in mind that at this time, his accounts were getting frozen, right, left, and center, and he chose that time to start purchasing real estate, which obviously raises the question that, was he trying to hide money from the investigators by parking it in real estate. So again, for anyone who hasn't read the documents, it's difficult to sort of summarize 51 pages in a few minutes. So I'd sort of recommend that everyone should really take time out to read these documents. I consider that to be a sort of like basic requirement for citizenship at this point, for being a good citizen, that somebody who wants to be your president, who has this sort of antecedents, and it's in the public domain, it's publicly available now, people should read this thing and not just sort of go off of what some people have said about it. You don't have to take my word for it or Festus Keyamo's word or anybody's word, right? These things are written in English. So people should just honestly read this document and then reach their own conclusions about the type of personality who is aiming to become president next year.
Okay, so David, let's put some arguments from their camp forward, and I want you to, dissect it. Yesterday, FFK, Femi Fani-Kayode, was speaking, and he said the deductions was because of, taxation issue, and that they even returned $1 million to Tinubu. Can you put your clarity on that for us?
Okay, so first of all, Femi Fani-Kayode, or preferably Bola Tinubu himself, would have to explain how an accountant on a fixed annual income of $28,800 came to have over $1.4 million in his account, because the math simply don't add up, right? The story he has told in public before is that, he used to be a consultant working at Deloitte, and that he was working on an engagement at Saudi Aramco, and they paid him this fantastic bonus of $850,000 which is obviously a lie, because you do not get paid that kind of money in consultancy work. Anyone who has worked in consultancy work would know that. I have worked in consultancy work. You don't make that kind of money, even if you are a partner, even an equity partner doesn't make that kind of money. But then, just to confirm this, we took the extraordinary step of hiring a private investigator in Chicago who retained a law firm that actually subpoenaed Deloitte LLP. That, okay, please provide records of this person. We want to see proof of this guy's employment and his staff payment details to corroborate the story. And as you saw yesterday, I put out the response that we got. Deloitte basically said, we do not know this guy. That has never worked for us before. So Femi Fani-Kayode needs to explain exactly how it is that if somebody is owing $460,000 in tax, apparently, on an income of $28,800 per annum, the maths are not adding up. Secondly, it's also stated very clearly in the documents what the seizure was for. It stated clearly that this is with relation to seizure of the proceeds of narcotics trafficking. It's written in black and white. So I don't really understand why people come to national TV to just sort of tell these really pernicious lies, because it doesn't really take 5 minutes to see. It's on the first page of the document, actually. So maybe Femi Fani-Kayode hasn't read the documents, or maybe he's banking on everyone not reading the documents, and that's why he thinks he can get away with telling those kinds of lies on national TV. That's best known to him.
Okay.
And then, right.
Yeah, David, I asked you, what is your interest in this matter? That part of the question you haven't dealt with. And I asked that question advisedly. Bola Ahmed Tinubu is running for the presidential office of Nigeria on the platform of the All Progressives Congress. Now, all of this in the public domain, your essay, your report, your investigative report in the West Africa Weekly, which was where I read it, okay, we seem to suggest that under Section 137, this is not a fit and proper person to be president of Nigeria. The PDP, the People's Democratic Party, tried to take advantage of this over the weekend, and they said, no, this person, $460,000 forfeiture and all that. Okay, lawyers have raised the issue about criminal forfeiture, civil forfeiture, but the issue is that it's a hybrid, pointing in just one direction. But what is your interest, considering the fact that all of these issues that you have reported transpired in another jurisdiction may not have any effect whatsoever here in Nigeria, because it's not something emanating from our courts? Are you aware of anybody within the Nigerian jurisdiction taking this up as an issue?
So with regard to the drug trafficking in itself, you're right about that, in that it didn't take place in a Nigerian jurisdiction. So as a legal issue, strictly speaking, in Nigeria, it's non-existent because it took place in the US. So on the basis of that, it's going to be very difficult to make this a legal issue. However, there are ancillary issues which I know for a fact are being taken up now. Probably either later today or before the end of the week, this is going to emerge. So I guess I have the privilege of breaking this on national TV. I happen to know for a fact that a lawyer who is based in the FCT is actually taking up some of these issues independently. He has filed a criminal complaint, which should have been actually served on Bola Tinubu yesterday. If it wasn't served yesterday, it should be served today. And these issues are with regard to the fact that he has essentially committed perjury on his INEC EC9 declaration. So some of the documents submitted were falsified. Some of the claims he made, such as having claimed to have been employed at Deloitte LLP, are manifestly false. We've gone to the extraordinary extent of obtaining subpoenas for his purported former workplaces, his former schools, Richard J. Daley College, Chicago State University, and there are all sorts of discrepancies, right? And this person has submitted falsified documents to INEC, and those are on his INEC 9 declaration. So this issue is actually being taken up by this lawyer. Actually, I'm going to name the lawyer. His name is Mike Enahoreba. So this action should have been served yesterday, but if it wasn't served yesterday, it's going to be served today. So I know for a fact that this is being taken up. Now, I don't know whether any political parties in Nigeria are actually taking this up, or whether, as you said, some of them are just trying to sort of jump on the bandwagon and take advantage of it. But I know that independent people who are lawyers and who are active in the civil society space are actually taking this up. And on a personal level, my own interest in this issue is that, first of all, as a journalist, I think I would not be doing my job if I'm aware that this, which could possibly be the biggest scandal in Nigeria's history, that someone who used to be part of a drug ring is in the running to become Nigeria's president. And, and that were to happen, and I was to know of it, and I wasn't to do my job, because this isn't a case of, oh, somebody was involved in, contract fraud, they stole money, embezzlement. That's the usual thing we see in Nigeria. It's almost not a surprise. This is a whole new level, and especially being that so many of us now live in a diaspora, and on a day-to-day basis, we have to deal with the reality of being guilty by association. Once the word Nigeria is mentioned, it's difficult to describe the amount of damage it will do to us. If such a person were to become president, and then the world were to start to view us through those eyes, that, okay, these people come from a proper narco state, in a way that not even Colombia during the days of Pablo Escobar managed, that would be disastrous on the level that, we're already like global pariahs. There's a visa ban for Nigerians in the UAE, and the UAE takes in everybody, right? But there's a visa ban specifically for Nigerians. Wherever we go in the world, we get profiled, you get pulled aside at the airports. Once they see your green passport, you're already guilty. So this will just make it so many orders of magnitudes worse. And I think it would be a severe dereliction of duty if there was something that I or any journalist with the means could do about it, and they didn't do anything.
Okay. David, just a quick one. The UAE slammed visa ban on citizens of Nigeria, Ghana, and 17 other African countries. So, it was across board in Africa.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the other things I'd like to ask is, because you said you wanted an open context and debate, but since we can't put two of you together in the room, these are some of the points he made on the interview he had on television. He said the things that were written, the depositions, were just mere presumptions. I want you to talk through that for me.
So again, I feel as if the reason people are able to say these things is because they expect that Nigerians will not have the sort of discipline to sit down and actually read these documents. First of all, let me just state that the conviction rate for federal cases in the US is something like 95%. It's between 95 and 97%. So the US is not a place where the federal authorities build a case against you on presumption. That's not how it works, right? In fact, the only reason that the conviction rate isn't even higher than that is because a lot of people choose not to even go to trial. They choose settlement or they choose plea bargains or whatever. If the U.S. authorities present an indictment against you, it's as good as you being guilty. So let's be clear about that first of all. Then secondly, if you actually read the documents, it wasn't as if somebody was making educated guesses that I believe that this money came from this place. No, everything was outlined in very granular details of wire transfers, and then by Tinubu's own admission, which he gave to Special Agent Moss, which the testimony he gave to Special Agent Moss, he admitted by himself that some of these funds came from these people whose only source of income was heroin trafficking. So I feel as if the reason people like Festus Keyamo have been able to sort of get away with telling those kinds of lies in the public domain is that most Nigerians simply haven't read this document. And I cannot stress this enough, that reading is like gaining your freedom, right? You don't have to be a lawyer to be able to just read something in English and understand what it means. People like Keyamo expect you to not do that. They expect you to lack the mental discipline and rigor required to do that. But I promise it's not that difficult. These things are written in black and white, right? So this idea that, first of all, okay, it was tax. It wasn't a drug forfeiture. And then, it was presumption. That's complete nonsense. That's not what these case files state at all. And people would know that if they actually read the case files. So you don't have to take my word for it. Again, please find these case files and read them.
Okay, David, your piece is titled Bola Ahmed Tinubu from Drug Lord to Presidential Candidate, right? Even
Yes.
from the title, the direction of the piece is well known. And you started it by saying the 1990s were crazy. And you ended by saying the 1990s were crazy, but the 2020s are even crazier, okay?
Yes.
Am I correct? Right?
Yes.
Evidence that I've read the piece. But, with those statements, all of this, to what effect? Because even with the way you started the piece, the way you ended it, it's obvious that you don't even believe that this will have any effect. INEC has said we are not investigating the man. The EFCC is not interested in the matter. And it's an old story. It came up when he became governor in Lagos State, when he got his second term. So there are people who say, well, this is a familiar story. If you will go into politics, be prepared to hear the story of how your father impregnated your mother. Is this what we're dealing with here? Are you also skeptical that this is of no effect?
So the point of doing this story wasn't really to get some sort of response from INEC or the authorities, because we know there's a good chance it's not going to happen. The point of this was to speak directly to the Nigerian electorate, to those who are going to vote next year. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to vote because I'm not going to be in Nigeria and diasporans can't vote. But for those who are going to be able to vote, that they should be suitably informed about this character who wants to be their president, because coming from the situation we are coming from in 2015, the accepted narrative now is that people didn't know. I still beg to disagree, but the accepted narrative now is that people didn't know. People didn't have information. People didn't know the kinds of people they were dealing with at the time. So, but now I think, at this time in the information age that we live in now, at a time when statistically most Nigerians have a smartphone, most Nigerians have high-speed, cheap internet access, I think there is no excuse now for people not being armed with the information that they need to make better choices, right? I obviously have a political preference, which I have not been shy to express. But the point of this isn't even to campaign for a particular candidate, but it's to say that, look, whatever choice you are going to make is okay. But this one thing, there has to be a red line somewhere. There has to be a line that you can't cross, that, okay, I can deal with certain levels of baggage, but this person or this level of baggage is too much for me. this is far too much of it. Like, this person is not fit to be my president. This is not mere controversy. This is not mere political gimmickry and gamesmanship. This is an actual existential threat to me as a citizen. So that was the purpose of doing this story, to speak directly to Nigerian voters that, look, now you have this information put in front of you. It's up to you to decide what to do with it. And that, incidentally, was also why I chose to make the decision to do this story in visual format as well. Even though that, it's very expensive and it's very time consuming. And obviously I found my own work myself, so it's not an easy thing to do. But I just feel like, look, let it be on record that this information was out there. So whatever choices that Nigerians make in February next year, there will be no excuse like there was in 2015.
Okay, so I mean, you talked about the fact that you have political affiliation. Some people will probably ask, is it because of your political affiliation? What's the case? That's number one. Secondly, the name of the former IG Peter Balogun was mentioned in all of this trail, and I want you to explain that angle, for us. The fact that, okay, this was pushed in the early 2000s, Tafa Balogun responded, something happened. Explain all of that angle to us.
Okay, so first of all, the political preference. So the candidates whose name I'm not going to mention here because this isn't about him. I've spoken to him once, literally one time. And that was it. And he was literally him getting in touch with me to say, oh, thanks for the support. And that was it. I don't like, I wish there was more of a relationship there, but it just isn't. And obviously for ethical purposes, they really can't be, because obviously based on the experiences we had from 2015, we've seen what happens when you sort of cross the line from being a journalist and to being an out and out political activist, and how that can destroy your career and make you lose credibility. I'm not trying to do that to myself. So I've also been careful to sort of maintain that firewall. So this isn't really about trying to project any particular candidate, even though I do have my preference, which obviously you well know. Now, the second point that you mentioned, which was the purported document originating from the US Consulate, which was addressed to Tafa Balogun in 2003. I think this is probably one of the more important points in this conversation, because it illustrates the extent to which people are clever by half. Now, what was requested, the information that was requested from the US Consulate at the time was that, has Bola Ahmed Tinubu been convicted of criminal activity in the US? Is there a record of a criminal conviction for Bola Ahmed Tinubu in the US? So obviously the response that came back was, no, there's no record of a criminal conviction for Bola Ahmed Tinubu in the US. So think of it as, I bought a car from a car dealer, right? Now, let's say the car I bought was a Honda Accord. Now, you go send a letter to the car dealer to ask the car dealer, did David Hundeyin buy a Mercedes-Benz from you? And then the car dealer responds, David Hundeyin didn't buy a Mercedes-Benz from me. And then you now take that to town and say, this is evidence that David Hundeyin didn't buy a car from that car dealer. That's what this is. Because the question is not, is there a criminal conviction? The question is, was there criminal activity that was linked credibly to Bola Ahmed Tinubu in the US? Is there some sort of indictment? And yes, there is. Whether you call it a civil indictment, whether you call it a criminal indictment, there was some sort of criminal activity that was linked to this character in the US.
Okay, let me also further that, oh, sorry, Dr. Bati.
No, go ahead.
Okay, let me further that by quickly asking. So the US Embassy coming to say that the records were clean, didn't they check their records on ground to see probably all of this that you have pointed out and that was also in circulation? Was that the case?
Yes, but they will obviously have seen it. But as I said, the specific information that was asked of them was, is there a criminal conviction? So they are not going to say, no, there's no criminal conviction, but there is this. No, they're just going to give you exactly what you asked for. Now, if you had widened the scope of your query, you'd have gotten the information that you've asked for. So the people who sent that query to them knew exactly what they were doing.
Okay, David, quickly, before we wrap this up. One, I think it's important that we're not asking you to vote on international television, since, you are in the diaspora. But it's important for you to explain to us who that your preferred candidate is. Because, you know, in all of this, context is important. And we're in the season of propaganda, and propaganda can be selective. If you really have a candidate, I think you should be courageous enough to say, this is my candidate. This is the person that I support. Otherwise, after this interview, you will see all kinds of things being promoted by social media bandits. That's number one. Number two, you are known. You have a reputation as an investigative journalist. So you have done this with regard to Bola Ahmed Tinubu. You say the people have the right to know. Okay, you know, people in the information space will understand that. People really have the right to know. But are you going to do the same investigation with other presidential candidates? Because people will say, oh, some of these other presidential candidates too have their own excessive baggage. Are you also pursuing the people's right to know? Investigate, say, for instance, Atiku Abubakar. Investigate, say, for instance, Kwankwaso. Investigate, say, for instance, Peter Obi. As briefly as possible.
So first of all, my choice of candidate, which I have never made any sort of secret of, is Peter Obi of the Labour Party. So that's for starters. And I owe no apologies for that. The second question, which you referenced, that am I planning to do similar work on other candidates? Well, the thing is, other candidates don't have, some other candidates do have some level of scandal surrounding them, but no other candidate has anything approaching this level of scandal, right? So, and I think I referenced this earlier in the conversation when I said that it's not the usual thing of, this one did a contract scam, this one sold assets at undervalued prices to his cronies, this one embezzled state funds. Those are corruption issues, and they are serious, and they should be taken seriously. But this is a whole new level, which is why I thought that this deserved priority. So am I going to do similar work on other candidates? Well, yes and no. Yes, to the extent that they do have, you know, whatever it is that they have that the public needs to know, but also no in the sense that if they don't have a history of drug trafficking, international drug trafficking, then there's no way I can do a story about their involvement in international drug trafficking. I can't make it up. So if people are expecting there to be equivalency, unfortunately, there might not be. And that's not my fault. That's Bola Tinubu's fault.
Okay, on that note, thank you very much, David Ondeyin, for joining us today on The Morning Show.
Again, court papers in relation to APC's presidential candidate Bola Tinubu's antecedents in the United States and some issues in his past resurfaces, raising many questions. 10 accounts have been linked to the All Progressive Congress APC's presidential candidate Bola Tinubu by the United States authorities in the early 90s, and $460,000 were deducted from one of the accounts as tax on investments domiciled in U.S. banks. This was the submission of the chief spokesperson for the Tinubu-Shatima Presidential Campaign Council, Festus Keyamo, in an interview on the controversy surrounding the alleged involvement of Bola Tinubu in narcotics and money laundering about 30 years ago. A few days ago, a documentary about Bola Tinubu and his alleged involvement in drug trafficking and money laundering in Chicago was released by Nigerian investigative journalist David Hundeyin. Well, joining us to discuss this is David Hundeyin. He is an independent investigative journalist. So good to have you join us, David. David, great. It's good to have you join us. I think we're just going to skip straight to it. For the benefit of those who have not necessarily seen this documentary or had the opportunity to read into some of those documents that you have put out on your social media, what's the centerpiece of this story and why are you so interested in it?
So this is a story about a federal case which was investigated in the US in 1992 that had at its core a drug kingpin in a town, in a city called Gary, Indiana, by the name of Lee Edwards. Now, when this fellow was taken down and given lifetime imprisonment, as part of the investigation, his source, his heroin source, was identified as a Nigerian drug dealer called Abiodun Agbele, who was working for another Nigerian drug dealer called Moise Adegboyega Akonde. And in the process of unraveling how they ran their business transporting heroin from Nigeria to Chicago en route Indiana, how the money was moved. Then a certain Bola Ahmed Tinubu was brought into the picture by the investigating agencies, which were the IRS and the FBI. Now, it was determined that Bola Tinubu's accounts, some of Bola Tinubu's accounts, were being used to essentially move money around on behalf of these drug dealers. And more than that, the actual address that was used to open at least one of these accounts was the same address that belonged to a house that was used by these drug dealers as the heroin pickup and drop off point. And even more to the point that Bola Tinubu's wife, Oluremi Tinubu, actually at a point opened a joint account with Aubrey Akonde, who was the wife of one of these drug dealers. So it would appear that these people were sort of joined at the hip. Now, what from the point of view of the investigating agent Kevin Moss of the IRS, what was the real smoking gun at the time was the sheer quantum of money that was discovered in some of Bola Tinubu's accounts. Now, why the money was a red flag was that according to Tinubu's own submissions on a credit application, which he had filled in a few weeks before the investigation began, he declared his total monthly income as $2,400, and that he had no other source of income. So someone with an annual income of roughly $28,800 being discovered with about $1.4 million in his bank account that he couldn't explain, that for obvious reasons was a money laundering red flag in itself. And if you read the documents, the investigating agent stated that he had probable cause to believe that these funds were in fact the proceeds of, I quote, narcotics trafficking. Now, also in these documents, the agents reached out to Bola Tinubu, who was in Nigeria by this time, preparing to run for senator in Lagos West in 1992. When he reached out to Bola Tinubu over the telephone, Tinubu actually admitted that he was very familiar with Moise Adegboyega Akonde and with Abiodun Agbele, and that on several occasions, he had paid sums into his accounts that came from them, only for him to make an about face a few days later and then claim to the same agent that he didn't know these people. So if you dig further into these documents, and I would sort of recommend that anyone who is watching this shouldn't necessarily just take my word for it or take what anybody else is saying about it. You should actually find those documents because they're in the public domain now. It takes a bit of time, but just sit down and read through those documents because it's actually not that difficult to sort of establish a timeline of what happened. Now, this wasn't in the documents, but I was able to dig this out on my own in the process of researching the story. Just about 10 days after first contact was established between Kevin Moss and Bola Tinubu. But bear in mind that at this time, his accounts were getting frozen all over the place because the US authorities believed that the money in those accounts was the proceeds of heroin trafficking. Bola Tinubu then proceeded to start spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on real estate, just days after he became aware that the US authorities had an investigatory interest in him, which obviously raises the question that, first of all, where did these funds come from? And more importantly, what was the purpose of parking this money in real estate? Was he trying to hide money from the feds after becoming aware that they were coming after him? These questions have never been asked before because some of these issues haven't even been made public before. I believe it was when I did the story in July that it emerged for the first time the sheer scale of real estate investment that he embarked on shortly after he became aware that the feds were coming after him. Millions of dollars were spent buying real estate in the US and in the UK. And all this for someone who claimed that he had been cleaned out by the Abacha regime, that he had no money, that he was essentially poor and broke, and that he had made his, he claimed that he had made his initial big sum of money, the sum of $850,000 from a bonus payment while working as an accountant at the audit firm Deloitte and Touche, which for anyone who has any knowledge of how corporate consulting works or who has worked in the Big Four, you would know instantly that that categorically is not true, because nobody makes that kind of money in the Big Four. Not associates, not partners, not equity partners. Nobody makes that kind of money. So clearly, he was being less than honest. So, what has sort of taken this story or elevated this story to another level, most recently now, is that some people, myself included, so people working in the media and in the civil society space, decided to sort of take it a step further and actually carry out some more in-depth investigation to try to establish exactly who this person is, and what kind of background that this person comes from. And in the course of doing this, one of the things that was done was hiring a private investigator in Chicago to actually find out whether his claims of having worked at Deloitte and at Arthur Andersen were true, and his claims of having gone to Richard J. Daley College and Chicago State University were true. And so this private investigator retained a lawyer in the Chicago area. The lawyer was filed a subpoena and successfully subpoenaed 4 different institutions. So Deloitte LLP was subpoenaed, Arthur Andersen was subpoenaed, Richard Daley College, which he claims to have attended in the mid-70s, was subpoenaed, and Chicago State University was also subpoenaed to try to find out what exactly all these institutions know about this guy. The reply from Deloitte so far was probably the most damning of all the replies that came back. Deloitte basically said that you might have seen this flying around on social media. I published it on my Twitter page yesterday. The reply basically said, we do not know this person. We have no record of this person. He has never worked with us. So essentially, you have a presidential candidate who potentially has committed perjury, because bear in mind that this claim of having worked at Deloitte is something which was repeated on his INEC EC9 declaration form. So potentially there's an issue of perjury there, which raises the question with INEC potentially about this person's suitability or the legal basis for this person being even allowed to run for office at all. And obviously, it also raises the question of a potential criminal prosecution, which is being pursued separately by an independent lawyer.
Let me come to that. I'm so sorry. Let me just come in there. I'm sure that you saw that interview. Festus Keyamo, of course, the Tinubu camp has insisted that no crime had been committed. From what you put together, the whole documentary, a couple of us have seen it over and over again, and they're saying that, look, this is also backed by the U.S. Consulate's message. Keyamo is actually saying that that forfeiture, the money that you made reference to in your documentary, was just for tax.
Right. So what Keyamo would need to explain to us is how it is that an accountant who, by his own admission, was making $28,800 a year, somehow had a back tax burden of close to $500,000. Because clearly, there's an arithmetic problem there. The maths are not adding up. So if Keyamo wants to insult people's intelligence, he has to tell smarter lies than that. You cannot tell me that an accountant making $28,000 a year was owing taxes that are equivalent to roughly 16 years of his aggregate salaries. That does not make any sense. So Festus Keyamo categorically was lying, as Festus Keyamo tends to do. And just as an auxiliary point to that, it should also be noted that the documents in question are not in any way ambiguous when stating what the source of the funds was and what the purpose of the seizure was. It's written in black and white on the first page of the court documents. It's stated there that seizure related to proceeds of narcotics trafficking, right? It's stated in black and white. So what people like Festus Keyamo are banking on is that most people simply will not read these documents by themselves and will simply go off of what they heard. So if obviously maybe you have a liking for a particular candidate that Festus Keyamo is working for, and you hear Festus Keyamo say that, oh no, everything is fine, it was just tax, then you will just reflexively adopt that position. He doesn't expect you to have the mental rigor to actually go read this thing for yourself. and see what it actually says. Which is why, as I keep on, as I've said to the point of irritation, I think over the course of the past few weeks, people need to actually just download these documents and read it. It's in the public domain. Just read it. And when you read these things, and it's written in plain English, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand what it says. When you read these things, you take away the power of people like Keyamo to mislead you or to insult your intelligence.
Again, let me go back to what Festus had said in a recent interview with Sheol. I'd like to just go directly. He's insisting that this is not a fresh case. This is, he's also making a case that if he was to be convicted, then he would have been serving a jail time. But then you mentioned something about a plea bargain in that documentary. And you talked also about a 5% of most of these people who the feds allowed to go, who are let off the hook if they take a plea bargain. But some people, for my understanding, if there is a plea bargain, then there is a reduced sentence of sorts or an agreement. It's either you're going to be ratting on somebody or you're getting a lower, number of years of conviction. So he's saying there was no conviction, so there is no case.
Which again is what a very disingenuous person would say. Saying that there's no conviction that is not the same thing as saying that there was no case, right? Because there are several ways of resolving a case under the U.S. justice system. As was mentioned in the documentary, the U.S. Justice Department itself, under its own guidelines, states very clearly that settlements are encouraged in situations where justice will be served. So, in other words, to conserve the resources of the U.S. government, it is often the case that plea bargains, settlements, things like that are used to resolve cases. So it's not everything that is taken to criminal trial. And bear in mind that the Tinubu's trial, or the legal process that brought Tinubu into this whole Lee Andrew Edwards mess, the actual centerpiece of this trial wasn't actually Bola Ahmed Tinubu. It was Lee Andrew Edwards, who was the spearhead, who was the kingpin of the heroin trade in Gary, Indiana. Where Tinubu came into it was by being identified as the money launderer, the accountant working for the drug cartel, which makes him just as culpable, but he wasn't the central figure. So from the point of view of the prosecuting agencies, it's more expedient to juice this fellow for what information he can give you, right, than trying to pursue a material conviction against him, because he might not even be that useful to you. The most useful people to you in that situation are the actual drug dealers who actually do the actual trafficking on a day-to-day basis. They are the ones who know where all the bodies are buried, both literally and figuratively. This is a money launderer who is useful, but in a different way. So it makes perfect sense that they were more interested in probably getting what information they can get out of him, as against trying to pursue a material conviction. And by the way, all of this is written very clearly in the case files. Again, I can't stress how important it is for people to actually read these case files, because there is this sort of like, you've seen people like Femi Fani-Kayode and people like Festus Keyamo come out like one after the other over the past week in this competition for who can misinterpret what is written in black and white in a more disingenuous way. And I just think that the antidote to this thing is for people to actually read what these court documents say in black and white, so that it's not what Keyamo said versus what Hundeyin said, because that doesn't help anybody. People really need to read these documents, right? That when you see that it is stated in black and white that I, Special Agent Kevin Moss, have probable cause to believe that the funds contained in accounts belonging to Bola Ahmed Tinubu at First Heritage Bank, blah, 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 represent the proceeds of narcotics trafficking. It's there in black and white. There's no argument to be had. So people like Keyamo are trying to create the impression that somehow the existence of this case is being misunderstood. It's being misinterpreted. Oh, it's something to do with tax, and they've not explained how someone earning $28,000 a year was owing taxes of $500,000 a year. And when that defense fails, then you say, oh, well, it wasn't really a conviction. Yes, technically it wasn't a conviction, but it was an indictment, though. Okay. So let me just quickly close with this, right? And this was an illustration that I used elsewhere when I had a conversation like this earlier this morning. Now, I likened it to buying a car from a car dealer, right? I buy a Honda Accord from a car dealer, and then someone writes a letter to the car dealer asking the car dealer that, did I buy a Mercedes Benz from the car dealer? The car dealer replies that, no, I didn't buy a Mercedes Benz from him. And then this person goes around and says, yes, this letter is proof that I didn't buy a car from him. That is what people like Keyama are doing by parading the supposed letter from the US Consulate, saying that there was no criminal conviction. Yes, there was no criminal conviction. There was a criminal indictment, though.
Okay. Let me quickly bring you to another thing that I saw that stuck out for me. There was a mention of the late MKO Abiola in that documentary in the whole laundering issue. Were you in any way insinuating that he had something to do with drugs? I mean, he's no longer here, but of course one of his sons is running for presidency. What does that even mean? Explain to the average Nigerian who sees this guy as a democracy hero, and you're here telling us that he seems to have been entangled in some drug business.
Well, again, it's not me saying anything. It's not me telling anybody anything, right? Because what was stated there was very clear and obvious. The sources that were cited are there for anyone to cross-check with. So, for example, Professor Gary Bush, who is a well-known African policy analyst and a professor of African studies at the University of Hawaii, who has extensive knowledge of Nigeria and the West African sub-region in the 80s and the 90s. He was one of my primary resource persons. And in fact, that entire part of the documentary was essentially based on a direct quote from him. So if anyone is displeased with the characterization of MKO Abiola as someone who potentially could have been involved in the drug trade, I don't think it's me they need to have a problem with, because I think the sources are accessible. So maybe they need to go meet Prof. Gary Bush and have a word with him, or ask him what he knows, because I spoke to him several times in the process of putting the story together and the documentary, and he was very positive. He stated very clearly that this person was involved in international drug trafficking and that the US and UK authorities were in the know, and that was the material reason why they were not that bothered about the fact that he ended up spending 5 years in prison and then he died, unjustly, because they were more concerned with him not becoming president to begin with. So that's not something I came up with. That's what the resource persons that were mentioned in the documentary came up with. So if anyone has a problem with history, then that's not my fault, unfortunately. Something people need to understand is that bad things have happened in Nigeria, and a lot of people that we have been raised to think of as heroes are not actually heroes, right? And I think it's one of the growing pains that people have to deal with. I on a personal level, have had to deal with that several times while researching stories, and I find out things about people that I didn't know before. So when I found out, for example, some years back that someone I once really looked up to, what's his name? The former Attorney General of the Federation, the guy who was murdered under the Obasanjo administration, like his name skips me now, Bola Ige. Yes, that there was a time that he didn't cover himself with glory either. Shortly after Tinubu came into office in 1999, and he was sued because there were all these controversies around him surrounding this same drugs case, surrounding his perjury on his INEC form, because he has been telling lies about what schools he attended and what jobs he has had for decades now. And Bola Ige, whom I thought of as a personal hero or whatever, was one of the people who was rubbernecking on behalf of this fellow and sort of twisting the law into pretzels to try and, wriggle this person out of, what he should have faced. So that's just the reality. So some people we think of as heroes weren't actually that, and that's not my fault. So people shouldn't attack the messenger. People should rather be more concerned about whether the message is true or not.
And that brings me to my other question, because there are people who, like the likes of FFK and in the Tinubu camp, who say this is just cheap blackmail. It's just that some of them think that you have been sponsored by the opposition, and the opposition here being the PDP and the Labour Party. But then I'm also questioning why you're so invested in this, even though you're saying that, yes, we need to know who the people who we hail as champions. But to what end is this documentary coming out? And many would say that you have a special leaning and a liking to the presidential candidate of the Labour Party, and this is why you're doing this. If you did not necessarily have that leaning, would you still go ahead with this?
So, I mean, 9 months ago, the Labour Party, as we know it, probably didn't even exist. The person who is the candidate of Labour Party now, we probably didn't even know 9 months ago whether he was going to be running for president at all. But the story in question, which I published in July, has been in production since January. So when people make comments like that, I feel as if maybe it's because they don't understand what my work process is. And maybe they also don't understand what my motivations are. So there's this sort of very illiterate idea that everybody in Nigeria is the same. Everybody in Nigeria is motivated by the same things. So if someone is very obviously motivated to achieve something, that must mean that someone somewhere is sponsoring him, or there's some inducement somewhere, or there's something in it for them. The idea of doing something for purely ideological reasons, almost like it doesn't exist in Nigeria. But unfortunately, well, people need to get used to the fact that not everybody in Nigeria is the same, right? People are different, right? I work for ideological purposes. So, for example, some of my close friends are always surprised when they find out, for example, that despite the fact that obviously my publication is a reader-supported publication, people can pay for subscriptions and things like that, so there's a bit of revenue from that. But apart from that, it's basically completely unfunded, and I fund my own work myself. I have a 9-to-5. Journalism is something I basically do on the side. People are always shocked to find that out. Like, why on earth would you go through all of this when you're not really getting anything out of it?
I'm really curious, because you had a retainer on a lawyer, you had an investigative, you had a private investigator. You went through all of that trouble. It couldn't have been for just a penny. It cost a lot. Who funded it?
Oh, no. So
how did you get funding?
The retaining of the lawyer and the private investigator, that wasn't actually me. So that's the independent lawyer that I referenced, whom I'm working with. So he was the one who carried all that load, right? So I just happened to be along.
And why was he so invested in it? He's not Nigerian. He's not going to be voting in this election. He's a private lawyer. So why was he carrying all of the burden?
The lawyer behind it is a Nigerian. So the lawyer he hired is an American. But the independent lawyer, his name is Mike Enahoro. He's based in the FCT. So he's actually the one who's fighting the independent legal action that potentially will challenge Tinubu's candidacy, because seeing as Tinubu committed perjury. I just happened to be lucky enough to have a front row seat, to be the media person who had access, to be able to get hold of the documents as they were coming through. That wasn't actually my work. So, I hope that has cleared that up. But over and away from that, just with respect to why I work the way I do, people really need to come to terms with the idea that there are certain people that exist who just have ideological beliefs and are willing to, watch the world burn for the sake of those beliefs. And I'm one of those people. I've said it jokingly before, half jokingly, that I have the mind of a suicide bomber, because that's just the reality. I feel as if at this point in time, really, as a Nigerian who has been through some of the things we've been through over the past 7 years, if you still feel as if you have something to lose, then I question your basic intelligence. In my case, for example, my entire life as I knew it is gone. Home has been taken away from me. I can't go back to Nigeria anytime soon. I live in exile. I live under asylum protection. My Nigerian passport isn't useful to me anymore. Right? I can't even travel with my Nigerian passport. Thankfully, I have another passport. My entire life as I knew it has been ended because people made a certain electoral decision in 2015 that I was not party to and I did not agree with. So how can I watch the same thing playing out again in front of me and not do anything about it, when the power to at least provide information to a large audience, which is the single power that I have, it's something that I can do.
So this is personal for you. It's not necessarily about Nigeria. It's personal to you.
It is about Nigeria, but it is also personal. It is also very, very personal. Absolutely personal.
Are we supposed to be expecting more of this? Because you also raised, a question mark in that documentary about, the antecedents of the man Bola Ahmed Tinubu, nobody knowing where he came from, his real name, before he became who he is today. And of course, you talked about him adopting a name from his adoptive parents, etc., etc. Are we going to see more of these exposés? Are you going to take on another presidential candidate? Is this something that would go around all of the presidential candidates? Or again, are you going to give the people, the naysayers, a reason to say, well, this was just an agenda, like you just admitted to, a personal one against a particular presidential candidate?
Well, to be honest, the quote-unquote naysayers, if they have a problem with any of the work that I do, they are free to do their own work. Like, I'm a firm believer in the sky being big enough for everyone to do what exactly it is that they want to do. So if anyone has a problem with the kind of journalism that I do or the way that I practice it, they are free to show their own method of doing it and show me how mine is wrong, basically. So I'm not really somebody who takes much stock in what people say or are not saying about my work. It's not important to me. I'm doing it because I want to do it. That's the only thing that is important to me. And as to whether this is going to be extended to the other candidates, well, the correct question to ask is, do the other candidates have this kind of scandals hanging around them? Do the other candidates have prior involvement
Are they
in international
saintly,
drugs trafficking?
as opposed to him?
Have the other candidates committed perjury on their INEC forms? If these questions are true, or if the answer to these questions is yes, then yeah, sure. Then the other candidates will get the same treatment. If they haven't done these things and only one candidate has done these things, well, there isn't going to be equivalency, and that's not my fault. That's that candidate's fault. That's Bola Ahmed Tinubu's fault.
Okay, finally, before I let you go, what are your thoughts concerning the 2023 elections? A lot of people are excited about the different momentums that we see on social media, whether it be the obedience, whether it be the articulate, whatever it is, the conquesias, all of them. But then we're looking at young people taking the forefront of this electoral process. Do we see a sustenance of that momentum till 2023? And are you optimistic or maybe rather pessimistic as to what the outcome would be?
I have to be optimistic because if I wasn't, then why would I even bother? I have to be optimistic, especially coming off the backdrop of what we all experienced in 2020, for example, where young people had one demand. This wasn't even a political demand. This wasn't an electoral movement or anything. It was just a very simple request that please stop killing us in the streets like dogs. Please stop raping us. Please stop kidnapping us, right? Stop using uniformed people to oppress us, right? And we saw what this administration and the ruling party did to us. So I feel like the memories of that period haven't gone anywhere. I certainly haven't forgotten. And I feel like the way the youth population was galvanized at that point in time, maybe the government itself didn't realize what it was doing. Maybe the administration didn't realize that it was sowing the seeds for its own eventual evisceration, because that's what I believe is happening, right? If this election were to hold today, and if this were a free and fair election, a genuinely free and fair election, I think it's fair to say that the ruling party wouldn't stand a chance. But then again, it's Nigeria, so is it going to be a free and fair election? We do not know that. We hope it is, but if we're going by precedent, there's a very good chance that it will not be. So we have to wait and see. But yes, I am optimistic. I have to be optimistic. If we don't have hope, then what's the point of anything?
Well, I want to say thank you. David Hunde is an independent investigative journalist, and he has put out a documentary called Drug Lord, From Drug Lord to Presidential Candidate, and it's all about the presidential candidate of the All Progressive Congress. Thank you so much, David, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
You had it all. Please, I want you to share your thoughts in the comment section box. Let's hear what you have to say about this. I hope you watched the video all through. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so. Like this video and share it to many people. We are obedient and we are going to reclaim our mandate. Thank you for watching.